Today we delve deep, deeper than ever before, into the darkest, most intellectual corner of the human mind, into the searing heat of fever, guilt, and the grand, deadly allure of a dangerous idea. This is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, the ultimate, uncompromising psychological thriller that poses the most terrifying question. Does a truly extraordinary man have the moral right to commit murder if it benefits the greater good of humanity? Our stage is the oppressive, yellow-stained St. Petersburg of the 1860s. We follow the tormented path of Rodion Raskolnikov, a former student, brilliant, starving, and consumed by a cold, radical philosophy. He wanders the suffocating streets, his mind reeling with the theory that the world is divided. There are the ordinary masses, doomed to live in obedience, and the rare, extraordinary men, the Newtons, the Napoleons, who possess the right, even the duty, to transgress all moral law, to step over blood, to assert their will. We will not just witness him test this idea with a terrifying, premeditated act. We will be trapped inside his feverish mind the entire time. But the real, agonizing story is not the crime itself. It is the immediate, visceral punishment, the psychological consequence that begins the very moment the axe falls. This is a torturous journey through suffocating paranoia, terrifying isolation, and a gripping, masterful game of cat and mouse played against a genius investigator. Yet, amidst the moral filth and spiritual darkness, there is a glimmer of light. This is a profound story of salvation, found not in the icy fortress of intellectual pride, but in the deepest trenches of human suffering and the quiet, uncompromising, biblical love of the one person who dares to see his soul, Sonia Marmeladova. Get ready to meet a man who thought he was a Napoleon, only to discover he was merely a feverish, tormented, deeply human soul. Our long journey into the heart of guilt begins now. The idea, the hell of poverty, and the edge. Our story opens in the dense, stifling, stinking heat of St. Petersburg in July. Rodion Raskolnikov is trapped in a tiny, stifling garret under the roof, which he compares to a cramped closet or a coffin. He is trapped in poverty, utterly dependent on his mother's last pennies. And most dangerously of all, he is trapped in the suffocating, destructive embrace of a theory. He is too proud to work, too arrogant to beg, and too brilliant to simply exist. He lives for his theory, seeing himself as a chosen, extraordinary figure. He has spent months cultivating this dangerous idea, that the means justify the ends, and that he, the superior being, must act decisively. To prove his terrible philosophy, he fixates on a specific target, an old, withered, and deeply cruel pawnbroker, Alyona Ivanovna. She is a parasite, an evil microbe, and Raskolnikov convinces himself that murdering her is not merely a crime, but a social service. He will take her hoard and use it to save hundreds, including his own sister. The external pressures reach a boiling point, intensifying his feverish resolve. He receives a devastating letter from his mother, detailing the sacrifice his beloved sister Dunya is being forced to make. To save Raskolnikov from destitution and poverty, Dunya is planning to marry the repulsive, calculating, and wealthy lawyer Pyotr Luzhin. Luzhin is a man whose sole motivation is to find a wife so utterly poor and indebted that she will be eternally subservient to him. For Raskolnikov, this is the final, ultimate, unbearable humiliation. The purity, the honor, the freedom of his sister is being sold into bondage for the sake of money. The theory demands action. His family's honor screams for salvation. He must prevent the sacrifice. Fueled by fever, poverty, and intellectual pride, a pride that tells him he is above the moral swamp, the decision is irrevocably made. Raskolnikov meticulously sets his plan in motion. He steals an axe, hides it in a loop under his coat, and heads toward the pawnbroker's apartment. He walks through the labyrinthine streets, seeing the city not as a home, but as a vast, indifferent machine facilitating his cold, intellectual design. He is about to prove his genius, his exceptional nature to the world, and most agonizingly, to himself. The act, the accident, and the sickening aftermath. Raskolnikov enters the apartment under the pretense of pawning an item. He is trembling, cold, and detached, the intellectual separating himself from the physical act. He raises the axe and strikes the old woman, killing her quickly. The murder is brutal, an explosion of violence that should have ended the story, but the terrible accident immediately shatters his philosophical fortress. Lizabetha. The pawnbroker's gentle, simple, and pregnant half-sister, Lizabetha, unexpectedly walks in on the horrifying scene. Raskolnikov, in a blind, primal panic, is forced to kill her too. This second, utterly unplanned murder is the moral and psychological death of his theory. He didn't just kill a microbe, he killed an innocent, a victim, a human being. He did not act like a Napoleon, he acted like a desperate, terrified madman. The true punishment begins the moment the axe falls and the blood is spilled. Raskolnikov is now an absolute wreck. He barely manages to escape, leaving the scene in a feverish, confused fog. His meticulous plan for the money, the supposed benefit to humanity, is irrelevant. He fumbles the keys, he almost gets caught, and he is forced to hide the few worthless trinkets he actually managed to steal under a stone in a random yard. His perfect intellectual crime has devolved into a messy, sickening human reality. The next few days are a complete descent into delirium, paranoia, and physical illness. The guilt is no longer an abstract philosophical concept. It is a physical poison running through his blood, tearing his mind apart. He is trapped in a perpetual state of nervous collapse, terrified that every step, every word, every sudden knock on his door is the police coming for him. His isolation is absolute. He cannot talk, he cannot think, and he cannot eat. Driven by a manic, almost suicidal impulse, he even dares to return to the crime scene, compelled to re-experience the event. He overhears conversations about the murder and then faints in the police station while being questioned about a minor debt. The extraordinary man who was supposed to stand above humanity is now just a trembling, cornered animal. He is defined not by his genius, but by his crime and the fear of its discovery. The psychological duel and the shadow of love. The intensity skyrockets with the arrival of the brilliant, infuriatingly patient detective, Porfiry Petrovich. Porfiry is not a common policeman. He is a master of the human psyche, a true connoisseur of guilt. He does not need physical evidence, which Raskolnikov shrewdly avoided leaving. He only needs the evidence of Raskolnikov's soul. Porfiry has read Raskolnikov's own published article, the infamous essay detailing the extraordinary man theory, and he knows its author committed the deed. Their interactions become the terrifying, tense core of the novel, a gripping chess game of glances, polite smiles, maddening philosophical banter, and half-veiled accusations. Porfiry never explicitly accuses Raskolnikov, but he circles him, baiting him, using Raskolnikov's arrogance and feverish state to make the student betray himself through a single, uncontrolled reaction. Raskolnikov leaves these encounters mentally shattered, realizing the old detective understands his mind and his theory better than he understands it himself. Amidst this relentless psychological torment, a devastating contrast to Raskolnikov's pride enters the story. Sonya Marmeladova. Sonya is the daughter of a perpetually drunk government clerk, Marmeladov, whom Raskolnikov meets in a tavern. To support her impoverished step-family, her sick stepmother and 3 small children, Sonya has been forced into the most agonizing sacrifice: prostitution. Her path is one of profound, voluntary suffering for others. Raskolnikov is initially drawn to her not out of romantic love, but out of a perverse intellectual sense of shared wretchedness. He sees himself as a criminal and her as a social outcast, believing their suffering links them as two lost souls. But there is a colossal moral chasm between them, where Raskolnikov's crime stems from boundless, destructive pride. Sonia's sacrifice stems from unconditional love, humility, and compassion. She is pure of heart, believing that God's grace and forgiveness extend even to her. She is the living embodiment of everything Raskolnikov's cold, rational, isolating theory rejects: the immense, saving moral power of true humility. The dark mirror and the plea for resurrection. The tragedy of the Marmeladov family reaches its heartbreaking climax when the drunk father, Marmeladov, is run over by a carriage and dies. Raskolnikov, in a moment of true, uncalculated compassion, uses the last of his money to help the grieving family. This spontaneous act is a momentary, saving rupture in his absolute isolation, a tiny flicker of his former decent self struggling against the cold grip of the crime. But Raskolnikov has another, much darker shadow: Arkady Svidrigailov. Svidrigailov is a wealthy, profoundly cynical, and morally depraved man who was once the employer of Dunya, Raskolnikov's sister, and is now obsessed with her. He is Raskolnikov's intellectual dark mirror. Svidrigailov also believes in absolute moral freedom and self-gratification, but without any pretense of saving humanity or serving a higher cause. He is the extraordinary man who fully exercises his freedom to commit evil simply because he can. By observing Svidrigailov, Raskolnikov is forced to see the ultimate horrifying conclusion of his own theory: a path of utter cynicism, spiritual emptiness, and destruction. This vision of pure nihilism, devoid of any redeeming goal, terrifies him far more than any police investigation. The climax of Raskolnikov's spiritual agony comes when he visits Sonia and demands she read him the most important story in the Bible, the story of Lazarus's resurrection. He is not asking for religious conversion. He is desperate for a miracle, a desperate whispered plea that a dead soul like his, poisoned by pride, can be reborn. Sonia reads it with a quiet, fierce conviction that shakes Raskolnikov to his very core. She tells him the only possible path to redemption. He must publicly confess. He must kiss the ground he has defiled by his deed, and he must accept the subsequent punishment. She promises to follow him, sharing his fate, enduring his suffering with him. This is the ultimate challenge to his crippling pride. Surrender the intellectual game, cast off the Napoleon facade, and embrace the simple, aching reality of human suffering and repentance. Confession, Siberia, and the final dawn. The overwhelming pressure from Porfiry, the dark nihilistic horror of Svidrigailov's eventual suicide, which provides the final damning proof that Raskolnikov's theory leads only to self-destruction, and the unwavering pure love of Sonia finally break Raskolnikov's arrogant spirit. There is no escape. The path of the extraordinary man is a dead end. Raskolnikov goes to Sonia, confesses the crime in its horrifying detail to her, and then, at her sacred insistence, makes his way to the police station. But before he enters the station, he performs his ultimate, defining act of surrender. He kneels down in the middle of the crowded square, kisses the defiled, dusty earth, and murmurs, "I have suffered." This public act is the complete collapse of his intellectual pride and the fragile beginning of his true human healing. He confesses and is sentenced to 8 years of hard labor in a desolate Siberian prison. Sonia, fulfilling her promise, follows him to Siberia, living in the small town outside the prison, providing him with the only constant moral anchor he has left. For a long, agonizing year, Raskolnikov remains cold, arrogant, and detached. He still believes his crime was merely a justified mistake, not a moral sin. He sees the other prisoners, common criminals who murdered for simple human reasons, as morally superior because they committed crimes of passion, not out of intellectual, calculating pride. The final spiritual transformation happens only after he falls gravely ill in the prison hospital. Sonia visits him, bringing a single ray of light into his utter despair. He realizes, with a flash of overwhelming, unexpected feeling, that he loves her. It is not pity, not intellectual curiosity, not shared suffering, but pure, simple, human love. He finally throws away his theory, his crippling pride, and his agonizing isolation. He picks up the Bible Sonia gave him, and the final lines of the novel assure us that his prison sentence is not the end of his story, but the beginning of his true redemption, his resurrection, and his passage into a new, fully human life. He chose humility and suffering over pride and destructive genius. And in that choice, facilitated by the grace of a woman who loved him unconditionally, he found his salvation.